Hello, everyone, and welcome to Healing from the Heart, Resilience Training for Healthcare Workers. I'm Catherine Justice, and I'm an integrative physical therapist and integrative medicine specialist. And I'm here to lead you through this series of resilience trainings. And before I get too far into the curriculum, I wanted to take a moment to just sort of introduce myself a little more, let you know a little more about my background. I always want to hear about the background of anyone who's teaching me anything to know kind of where they're coming from. So I thought I would tell you a little of where I'm coming from. And before I do that, I wanted to take a moment to just acknowledge and recognize the land that I am sitting on right now, presenting to you from. So I'm here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is on the traditional territory and homeland for the Dakota people. And I wanted to recognize that the Dakota people are still here and that I strive to honor their past and their current stewardship of this land. And if you yourself would like to take a moment to learn about the history of the land that you're on, I put a link here on the PowerPoint to encourage you to go to the California Indian Cultural and Sovereignty Center, where you can find out more about the history of the land that you are on. But now to talk a little bit more about my background and what brings me to this work. So my training in my career has had kind of lots of twists and turns along the way. I started my career working in the arts, working in theater, and then took a turn and started learning more about yoga, teaching yoga. And then I took another turn and went to physical therapy school. And then I took another turn where I started to integrate kind of all of these different aspects of my work life and studied integrative medicine. So I did a 2-year fellowship with the Academy for Integrative Health and Medicine to learn more about integrative medicine. And throughout all of this, all of my work has always had to it a social justice component to it, of thinking about the larger context of the work that I'm doing and how to use whatever work it is to help create a more equitable and healing world. And that's where I put this picture of myself up wearing this t-shirt from a quote from Dr. Joy Lewis, who wrote this wonderful book called Healing. And I love her quote. It was, "May the revolution be healing." So inherent within this idea of social justice and within this idea of healing, that these two concepts can be united. I also wanted to introduce my cat Lotus, because she, if there is a camera running, she wants to be in front of it. She's very much the diva. So she will probably be weaving her way in and out through all of these modules at one point or another. And I also wanted to just emphasize in sort of the background that I bring to this work, probably more important than any of the roles that I've mentioned already, is that I bring to this work someone who has lived these skills. I bring to this work someone who, myself personally being someone who was pretty sensitive to stress, very sensitive to stress, and a very kind of sensitive person. And that I've really had to learn these skills in a very personal and embodied way. And so I bring that lived experience to this work too, to kind of help guide others through their journeys with managing stress. When we think of resilience, I'm a big fan of metaphors. So you're going to hear a bunch of them in all of these modules, but this is the first metaphor we're going to use, which is the idea of a storm, which is a great metaphor for stress and for resilience in general. So there can be, when we think about resilience in the face of a storm, we can think about kind of chaos and stress happening around us, but the ability to stay rooted, to stay grounded, kind of like you see in these palm trees, that they are bending, they're blowing in the wind, but they are grounded and rooted. Another metaphor that we can look at is this idea that the storm and the chaos is happening around us, but that there's sort of a calm center to it. This idea of finding kind of our center, finding calm amidst chaos. And then the third metaphor of how this can play out is in the aftermath, which I think is something that gets really overlooked when we're thinking about stress management. We often think about how to manage stressful circumstances, but we don't often think about what to do after the stress has passed, but when our body still feels it, of how to repair the damage that might have been done, or to repair the harm that might have been done during stress. I also want to acknowledge that I know there's a lot of controversy around just resilience training in general, particularly with healthcare workers. And there's controversy for a good reason, because if done without the full kind of idea of what resilience can be and without the full context around resilience, this kind of training can be actually quite abusive when it's looked at in the context of helping people manage stress without actually looking at what's causing the stress. And so I wanted to emphasize right from the start that that's not what we're going to do here. We're not talking about, I'm kind of jumping around on this slide, but if you look at that third bullet point, that we're not going to create complacency with unsafe or abusive work environments by teaching ourselves to be more resilient to situations that we shouldn't have to be in the first place. So quite the contrary, what we're going to do is through this work of better understanding how we respond to stress, having more tools in our toolbox to understand our personal response to it and to regulate that response, we're going to find more empowerment together with each other, both as individuals, but also as a community, so that we can cultivate this empowerment to advocate for system change, to know when enough is enough, when things have to change. So if we don't have that understanding of how stress is affecting us, we might not have the full understanding of how to change the environment. So we're thinking of this as a both and. So we're not using this as a replacement for system change. And I encourage you to look at the modules that have been put out already around kind of burnout and resilience prevention and system change to prevent burnout, to treat burnout, that my colleague Dr. Linzer has put out. And so he and I are sort of working in tandem from two different angles to support this work. I also want to emphasize, if we go back to those first two bullet points, that resilience training is not a spa day. It's not a one-time like, oh, do something good for yourself and then pretend that that's going to make a lasting impact. It is like this deep kind of transformative daily change in how we approach our work and how our work environments are structured to support us. So it's deep transformational skills, not platitudes, not superficial. And we're not even working in this kind of self-care mode. I want to think of this more as community care, something that we do together as a group to support ourselves and to support each other. And I also want to give a shout out that this resilience training, it's not based in sort of this allopathic or reductive model of treating just external symptoms as if they're independent from the larger context of the whole of who we are and from our environment and our world. So this work is based in an integrative model, in a whole person care model, where these complex interactions between mind, body, spirit, and environment are all explored and honored. And that we're looking for where things connect rather than trying to separate them out. So what is resilience? I really, again, here's my metaphor, love. So two metaphors, I couldn't decide because they're both so good. So we have our bucket metaphor and our window metaphor, and I'm going to embrace them both. So if we think about our ability to manage stress as like a bucket, and so our ability to manage it is the bucket, and the amount of stress that goes in is the water. Or you could think of the size of the window is kind of how much capacity we have to manage stress. And then the wind pushing at the window, how strong is that wind, could be the stress of the world around us. So one way to better manage stress is to empty the bucket, is to take some of those things that are causing stress out of the bucket, or decrease the pounding of the wind against the window, so we can change what the stress is and from the outside world. But another avenue that we can go down is we can also think about growing a bigger bucket, or as they say, widening the window. And these metaphors the bucket metaphor I first heard from Dr. Henry Emmons, whose work I've cited below. And the window metaphor I first heard from Dr. Elizabeth Stanley, whose wonderful book I've also cited below. We're both experts on this work, and I highly encourage you to check out both of their repertoire. But this idea, again, of growing a deeper capacity for us to manage the stress of the world, widening our window, growing a bigger bucket. And then that third sort of avenue towards resilience comes not in the size of our bucket or the size of our window or how much water or wind we're being inundated with, but it's really what is the environment like? And I actually love this picture that I found of the bucket, because you see here a great example of, it doesn't matter how big that bucket is, it doesn't even matter how much water is in it, that wall is not steady, it's not stable, that bucket's going to fall over. So we need to sometimes build a better wall. We need to have more support underneath us or around us in our environment in order to really manage the stress. I have really appreciated some recent work that the U.S. Surgeon General has been doing around workplace wellness, and particularly for healthcare workers. And what they've been doing is they're really going in depth into these different models of how to support people at work, looking at both internal and external factors and interventions. And I love that they're considering this. Again, it's a both and. So not one is not a substitute for the other. And when we think about the chaos of healthcare environments in particular, yes, there can be plenty of changes that we can orchestrate on a system and societal level that would reduce our stress. Yes, 100%, absolutely. However, having the job of caring for people when they are in a health crisis or when they're not well, that is inherently stressful. And learning how to have these internal skills to know how we can be present compassionately with another person, and then how we can let that stress of that encounter go. That is a skill. I don't know about you, but I was never taught that in my physical therapy training. We never even mentioned it. It was not discussed of how we manage our own nervous systems. And I think that's pretty typical of most healthcare education, is not addressing this. So let's address it. Let's do it now. For some of us, we might be getting this like in residency or in med school. If that's the case, wonderful. If you're getting it years out, that's great too. At least we're getting it. So, and if you're also in that frame of mind, you're like, yeah, I've heard this before. I know this. We have in the world of yoga and in the world of mindfulness, we have this phrase of a beginner's mind, of approaching things with a beginner's mind, with a fresh outlook, as if you haven't heard it before. And then you'll be most receptive for getting the most benefit from the practice. So I'm going to challenge you to put on your beginner's mind if you think that these are things that you have heard before. Along with this Surgeon General's model, though, I wanted to point out a few things on here that I think are of particular concern for healthcare workers. One of them was within that first loop-de-loop at the top there, protection from harm. And one of the things that I really appreciate that the Surgeon General is emphasizing within that loop is the idea of building in time for rest and allowing for there to be rest at work, as well as, and you'll see when we get into the curriculum of what we're going to explore in this resilience training, but that sleep and rest are going to be a really important component for our own resilience, both kind of in the work environment as well as at home. Also this idea of connection and community. So creating work environments that emphasize teamwork and that emphasize collaboration rather than siloing people, again, is another mechanism towards better well-being. And then the idea of mattering at work. I think that can be really powerful too, particularly for people who are drawn to healthcare in order to work with people who are from underprivileged or under-resourced communities. That really connecting the work you do to the mission, to that desire to create a more equitable world, that it can be a really powerful place to enter into this work, but it can also lead to burnout, because that's a big hill to climb. There's a lot of inequity in our society. And when you are every day kind of feeling that inequity, that takes its toll too. So part of this resilience training too is going to be looking at how those of us who have chosen to work with low-resourced communities, with historically marginalized communities, or communities who've experienced trauma, how we manage and protect ourselves while helping others. And then also just acknowledging too that the stress of these healthcare environments is more extreme for any one healthcare provider who themselves comes from an under-resourced or historically marginalized community, or who themselves hold a history of trauma in their bodies, that this work is going to be extra important. And another layer of that comes from these two ideas. One of the whole person health model, which I put the image from the VA up there because I think they're doing such a great job of articulating what this is, what whole person health is, as well as this idea of the exposome. So when we look at the VA's whole person health model, what we can see and what I love about this model is how all of these circles intersect. So we're not pretending that moving the body happens in isolation from our surroundings or from the power of our mind or from our spirit. We're not pretending that the need to recharge for sleep and renewal is independent from the food that we eat, is independent from our social life. So all of these things are interdependent. They all intersect, and they all kind of make up this the full picture of a person's sense of health and well-being. And so that in this module, we're really going to dive into these circles, and we're going to dive into the spaces where they intersect. And then this idea of the exposome, so the CDC defines it as how exposures from our environment, diet, lifestyle, etc., interact with our own unique characteristics, such as genetics, physiology, epigenetics, and how they impact our health. And what I like about this idea of the exposome is it really acknowledges that no matter what your internal resources are, no matter how much meditation you do and all of this, the environment that we're in matters. And the history of the environments that we have been in matters. And by environment, I don't just mean like physical environment. I mean sort of the sociological environment. So experiences of racism, experiences of prejudice, those are part of our environment. And again, those are things that we are not going to, that we'll continue to name and explore throughout all of the resilience modules about how we manage those things. And for anyone else in the room who is a evidence-informed nerd like I am, this is going to be an evidence-informed and an evidence-based curriculum. So I wanted to give a shout out to the Johnson et al. Study, just because that was done in collaboration with Dr. Henry Emmons, who was one of my first teachers in resilience. And so this curriculum is inspired by his original, this curriculum around mindfulness, nutrition, and exercise. So it's not just the same as this study, but it's going to be based around it. And that study with a waitlist control design found some really great outcomes in decreased depression, anxiety, stress, and sick days for healthcare workers. And there's some other studies I've linked here again, whose curriculum that I have looked at and have been inspired by in creating this curriculum. And you can see there's a real variation here too on intervention time and delivery. So some of these are virtual, some of them were in person, some of them, I thought this Clockner et al. Study is interesting if it's a day-long workshop, but then followed by 3 one-hour virtual sessions. And then even we've got the Franco et al. Study, which was just a one-day workshop, and they still found some good outcomes from it. So if they can get it in a one-day workshop, we are going to have a lot of opportunity to explore this and go in depth. And what are we going to do? So now we're going to talk about the actual, the stuff we get to do. So another metaphor coming at you now. So we've got tributaries as this metaphor. So if we think about that sort of whole person self as the water within a river. So the water is us. And then these different avenues towards resilience, I think of them as tributaries, because then they're all bathed in the same water. So even if we're going down the mind tributary, we're still maintaining that whole person sense of self, even when we're falling down the mind. And a tributary isn't just like an isolated branch, it reconnects with other for parts of the river. So again, this idea that all of these different aspects that we're going to learn throughout this training, that they all interrelate. None of them happen in isolation. So what are they? So when we go down the mind tributary, we're going to look at the basics around our stress response and how to regulate it, how to recognize what kind of level of stress reactivity we're under. We're also going to learn some psychological first aid techniques about how to recognize both in ourselves and in our coworkers, our patients, our family, our community, when people might be under mental health distress and how to offer assistance for them. And with that work, that's not just going to be me creating these modules. I'm going to have the assistance of a wonderful PhD psychologist, Dr. Sandy Shallcross, is going to be collaborating with me on some of these, particularly around the mental health focused material. And then we're going to also learn within the mind, we're going to learn some basic mindfulness skills. And then we're going to go down a body tributary where we're going to learn about the holistic mind, body, spirit benefits to movement, nutrition, sleep, and pain management. And I think that's something that often gets overlooked, but anyone who's been in pain knows how draining it is on our resilience. And so if we can find ways of reducing the physical pain that our body feels, we're going to grow a bigger bucket. That's definitely going to help widen our windows. And then when we go down the spirit tributary, we're thinking spirit not in any religious sense, but more in the sense of engaging and connecting to our sense of purpose, meaning, our deeper values, our sense of joy. And a lot of that is going to come from, I didn't put a slide on it, but my training as a yoga therapist will come into this as well. And there's some great research and some great models on how kind of that bringing forth that sense of joy and connection with your deepest self through some yoga practices, not any of which involve crazy stretchy moves. So for those of you who are yoga phobic, you can set your mind at ease. There's going to be no like pretzel moves anywhere in this. Also within that spirit tributary, and we'll talk about this in a minute more, is this idea of salutogenesis. So I'm just going to throw that into the ether because I've got a slide coming up on it. And then we're also going to dive into the muck of moral injury and how to manage it when we feel it, how to recognize it when we feel it, and how to move forward when we feel it. And then the final tributary, again, thinking of this not as self-care, but as community care. So we're going to really jump into this idea of how the community and how the environment, the world that we live in, can also nourish and support our well-being and our resilience, looking at trauma-informed care models, looking at health equity, and really how to then, like now that we know what we know, we've gone down all these tributaries, learning about how to manage stress in ourselves and in our communities. Now, what kind of system do we want to be practicing in, and how do we really advocate for that change that's going to help to bolster up the system, again, build that stronger wall for the bucket, for the window to reside in. And the end result of this is to create this community and this culture of healthcare workers who are committed to whole person well-being, and not just for themselves, but for their coworkers, for their patients. We're going to have this great toolbox of tools to support ourselves, to support each other. And we're going to be able to share this with others. And my hope, too, is that eventually, maybe some of you will be part of a Train the Trainer cohort so that we can really spread this work and have more people teaching it to more people throughout the whole planet. Eventually, world domination of resilience is my ultimate evil plan with this. But really, the evil plan is improved well-being for everyone. That's the true nature of it. And in light with that, I wanted to give an extra shout out to this idea of salutogenesis. And another term that often goes hand in hand with it is eudaimonia, which these are both, I believe they're Greek, maybe Latin. I'm a little rusty on it. Greek or Latin terms around thriving, not just surviving. So looking at not healthcare as a system that cures disease, but looking at healthcare as a system that really helps people achieve live their best lives, be their best selves. So salutogenesis being this approach to human health that examines the factors that contribute to the promotion and maintenance of physical, mental well-being, and I would add in there spiritual and environmental as well in my own definition. Again, kind of looking at what makes us well. And with eudaimonia, looking at sort of that sense of joy that we can have in our life that doesn't change based around the external circumstances. So that inner spark of joy that we have inside ourselves. And we're going to explore those concepts together. And so now how are we going to do it? Like, this sounds great, right? Sign me up. Like, yes, please. I would like this. So the how is that we are going to learn this in our bodies through embodied learning. Recognizing that all learning really happens in the body. That's where it happens. And when we think about the state of embodiment, it's this feeling of being present in the body. So being kind of present and aware of this learning as it's happening. Sometimes we call it feeling the body versus thinking about the body. Embodiment can be positive or negative, and we're going to try and jump into this positive embodiment, which is this deep connection to this presence in the physical body that brings us a sense of joy, of deeper connection, and of deeper purpose to life. And looking at how we relate our internal sensations and how that then translates into our interactions with the outside world. And to really get this sense of embodiment, to really embody these concepts, this isn't a spa day or a vacation type activity. This is where brief but often is my catchphrase for this. Brief but often intervention. So brief and often practices, things that you can do for 30 seconds, multiple times a day, things that you can do for 5 minutes once or twice a day versus trying to meditate for 3 hours, once a month. We're going to do little short things that we can do frequently, because that's really how our body learns best, is through that kind of brief but frequent repetition. And how it's going to happen, this is something that's going to be really fun to discover alongside all of you. We're going to have, for sure, as part of the curriculum, these online modules, and they can be self-paced and done at your own pace, at your own time, at your own convenience. But I'm hoping that we will also have some opportunities for some real-time interaction and some real-time cohorts to move through this curriculum together. And again, whether it's formal or informal, but finding ways to engage with this curriculum, not just in isolation, not on your own, but with other people. And we'll get creative about how to do that. And if you would like to explore more of that real time or more of that cohort model, or if you are interested in a train the trainer model, I have my email address at the end, and feel free to email me or contact your center director, and we can start to put together a list of people who are interested in the train the trainer. But also knowing that a lot of the work in these modules is great, and it will set the sort of foundation for the practices, but the real integration of the work comes from these home practices. And so you will have your access to videos of movement practices, audio files of some meditation practices, and some other sort of contemplative practices throughout that are going to help you bring this work into your huddles, into your staff meetings, into your commutes, into your daily life. And that the curriculum is iterative. So I am open to feedback at any point during this process. Feel free to reach out, and we can kind of create it as we go, as you see the need. And you'll be able to find them online. I should have written it on the slide here, but it's cal-ahec.org is where all these resources will live. Oh, here, it was on the next slide. So these are some of the practices that you're going to be receiving along with this module. Is a meditation and mindful awareness, some mindful movement practices, and some mindful connection with others practices as well. So they'll all be at cal-ahec.org. And so to close us off, I wanted to, thinking about kind of these brief interventions, just take a moment here that we can explore this sense of mindful awareness together. And you can do this eyes open or eyes closed. You can do it sitting, lying down, standing, walking. You can do it wherever you're at. That's where you can do it from. But you're going to take a moment to tune in to whatever internal sensations are coming up for you. So noticing if there's any physical sensation in the body. It might come in the form of tension or aches or pains. Or it might come in the form of just the feeling of the breath moving through the body. Or it might come through the form of just noticing where you're contacting the earth, whether it's through your feet, your legs, your hips, your body. We're just going to notice one sensation inside ourselves, just finding one thing that we can tune into. And as you tune into that sensation, just following it through, just noticing any shifts or changes that occur as you pay attention to it, without trying to change it, without trying to judge it. of just exploring the nuance of whatever that sensation is. And as you explore that nuance, if you'd like, you could offer up just an intention of healing or compassion or gratitude or whatever other theme makes sense for you. But offering up some idea that recognizes the struggle and that moves us towards a state of healing and a state of connection. And then if your eyes are closed, I'd invite you to open them. If your body was still, I would invite you to stretch, to wiggle, bringing your awareness back into the outside world, but maybe with just that kind of hint of acknowledgement of whatever it is going on inside of you right now. And the acknowledgement that whatever it is internally inside of you, that it matters and that you matter. So thank you so much for starting this journey with me. I'm so excited for where it's going to go. And again, I wanted to throw my email address out into the ether in the hopes that I get some replies of people who are interested in this work, have questions about this work, want to do more of this work. To feel free to email me, catherine.justice@hcmed.org. And I'm just so excited to follow these tributaries alongside you.